Hey, good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with me. I'm excited today to talk about some tips around the 8A Small Business Program. It's an excellent program, but it doesn't always work for everybody, and I want to make sure we're constantly sharing tips back and forth that can move forward. Before we get started, though, I like to just start off with a tip for success for those of you showing up early and on time and engaging in LinkedIn and the chat, et cetera, and YouTube. If you're on different platforms, come over to LinkedIn. This is where we're all able to be a community, messaging and chatting back and forth. It's where you can meet federal buyers. So other social media platforms are kind of cool, but this is where the work happens. So come on over here. So my tip for success for those of you showing up early and on time is to remember Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. If you haven't read that, like, here's all my habits, by the way. I've been reading this book since 1997, I think, is the first time I signed it, because I sign my books when I read them. And but habit number 1 is be proactive. The reason I bring this tip up is because one way to be proactive, related to a post I did this morning, is every morning spend 5 minutes looking on SAM or in your GSA eBuy contract vehicle schedules, etc. Look in there for RFIs or sources sought notices. It literally, once you get through like everything that's in there one day, then every day after that, it takes 5 minutes or less for you to look in and go, is there anything I'm missing? And I provided 561, a link to 561 RFIs that are due in the next week. Just take the time to browse. Don't filter. Don't use keyword search. Browse. Take a look at all of them for a second, because you don't want to miss one that is mislabeled by the government. They just don't put the right title. They don't use your keywords, whatever. But it's better initially to go in and take a look at them. So anyways, that's my proactive tip for success before we get started on the full out training, is be proactive. Look at sources sought and RFI notices every single day. If you're in sales or responsible for generating new revenue or bringing in new contracts into your company, 5 minutes a day for that will really pay off down the line. Okay, so let me just flip over. We'll get started on our activity. Again, thanks for engaging in the chat. Don't forget to put your company name and your core competency into the chat. Let us know who you are. Most importantly, let each other know who you are. I mentioned this a minute ago, but the 8A Small Business Program, it's great for those who qualify for it. It really is this awesome 9-year on-ramp into not just business strength to create a business that's going to be around for a long time, what we might call legacy businesses that are around for a long time, but also it's a really great program for spearheading a company deeper into the federal agency or into the federal market, so they can have a very strong customer, right? Of course, every agency, every office is a different customer, but holistically, the federal government is a customer. It's one customer when you really think about it, because with many, many, many buyers, like hundreds of thousands of buyers, because they all fall under SAM and FPDS and CPARS and these things. They're all the same tool. And so that SBA 8A Small Business Program is phenomenal for driving small businesses that can qualify for that program into the federal market. But unfortunately, not everything is great in 8A land, right? The SBA's own Inspector General recently did a report, and they're talking about the SBA's failing in supporting 8A small businesses. And the OIG report talks about how the SBA and agencies need to do this or that or this or that, right? I don't care about that. What I want to do is go, well, what can we do? Because if I wait for the OIG's report to impact somebody out there, it's going to take years. They literally move very slow to do things, right? For me to even get somebody sometimes to be a guest takes months for them to be a guest on a podcast, when all I want them to say is what they say all the time at a conference or something, right? And it's just because it's a bureaucracy. It's fine. But we have the ability to move at a much faster speed. You can wait for them to address their shortcomings, or you can join me in this training and then other things, and we can talk about 3 strategic steps that you can take towards success, things you can do that'll start helping you have the success that you want. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the top tips for, not top tips, but tips for 8A small business success in the federal market. I hate the whole idea, and I use it sometimes myself, about top tips, because I'll give you tips and I'm like, oh, what about these ones? These are pretty good too. So I think top is dependent on where you're at, what you're doing. But here's what I'm going to cover down on in today's training. And I'm going to move at a pretty fast pace, but I'm going to talk first about just understanding the 8A program as it relates to money, right? So understand how much is being contracted out to 8A small businesses. In particular, by the way, I'm talking about June to September. I'm not even actually going to talk about an entire fiscal year or conceptually. I want to talk about what you can expect in June 2024 to September 2024, right? That end of the fiscal year. So then also I'm going to talk about what's being bought. Let's look at what's out there, sole source to 8As, and then who's awarding it, which agencies are awarding to 8A firms. So I'm going to cover down on just understanding where it's all going, and then I want to give you 3 tips, and I'll just give you a spoiler alert on what the 3 tips are, right? The first tip is to focus on one agency or one department driving straight in. The second is to pursue just one type of past performance. And this one, I believe very strongly, is key to your success to be a much, much larger company when you're ready to get that stage. And the last one is embrace other companies, other government contractors, embrace them for subcontracting, embrace these non-8A firms, whether you need them or not. And I'll talk about that, but it's very valuable to building strong relationship in a strong company. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonald. I want to welcome you to my federal sales training, where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years in the federal market as a small business owner, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. When we follow a process A to Z, we're going to have repeatable, predictable results. And that's what I want for you. It's what I want for you as you head towards the end of the year. If you haven't done so already, part of your success can come from networking. And this training enables you to have networking opportunities. So engage in the chat, but also you can sign up or subscribe to our Government Contracting Success newsletter here on LinkedIn. In there, we share all sorts of great content that is designed to help you move forward. I've got fantastic articles in there talking about how to succeed as a woman-owned small business, which agencies prefer women-owned small businesses. And when I say prefer, I mean through their dollars, through their set-asides. Same thing with 8A small businesses, et cetera. So a lot of great content. Make sure you subscribe. And the last thing is I just want to thank those of you registering for training. Consider registering for tomorrow's training, the day after. I think today is Wednesday, right? So we have Thursday and Friday, and then all next week I got training coming up as well. Register for training. It's a simple thank you from you to us, but it allows us to also have LinkedIn push the word out farther. Okay, let's get rocking and rolling by talking about 8A firms and understanding just from a numbers perspective. I like to start in one place of level setting where we're at before I get to giving you tips. So again, I'm going to talk about, for today, I really want to focus on 2 things. Sole source 8A dollars and June through September 30th. So the end of the fiscal year, and sole source or direct award contract dollars. By the way, if you're not an 8A firm, you should pay attention to this and then go find an 8A firm that you can work with, because these 8A firms, the direct awards or sole sources are kind of like contract vehicles, and they have a contract vehicle you don't have access to. It's not a named contract vehicle like GSA or Stars 3 or Oasis or something, right? But it is a contract vehicle because it's a vehicle, that 8A program, that the government buyer goes through to reach the vendors. And if you want to team up with an 8A firm, you can be getting 49% of a contract perhaps. So keep that in mind as I go through. You could learn what I'm teaching, and then you could share that information also with 8A firms. Okay, so the period of performance is the rest of the fiscal year for what we're talking about. And we're talking about sole source when I say contract awards. And this is fiscal year 2023. I should have put that on here somewhere. Oh, I did. Okay. So I'm talking about what I want you to do for 24, but this data is 2023. And the contract award, what I mean by this is that if you look at all the awards that are sole source to 8A businesses in this period of time, June through September 2023, it was 10,891 contract awards, and that represented $5.8 billion. That was the totality of it. But those aren't just new contracts. Some of those are option years, right? So if somebody had a 5-year contract, a lot of the activity that happened in last year at the end of the year was just an option year being exercised. So I put in here new contract awards. These are brand new, let's say 5-year contracts coming out that were awarded starting in June through September 2023. there was 3,430 new contract awards in that end of the last fiscal year. And that represented almost $4 billion out of the 5.8 billion, right? So that's huge for the money that's out there. And this is what I want you to pay attention to, in particular, if you're an 8A small business. All right, so let's talk very briefly about what was awarded, right? I don't like to dive too far into the NAICS code because it really doesn't tell a lot, because I don't have what you sell to compare it, right? But you can get a general understanding from your own NAICS. The biggest spend at the end of the year was commercial and institutional building construction or something, right? So that's construction, basically. You can think of that, maybe even facility type stuff. But then you get to the second one, that was a big spend, $657 million. So over $500 million for admin support. One of my customers, that's what they're trying to do. That's a good sign, right? And then coming down, the next few are all in the same world of IT. So 541, 512, 519, 511, these are all computer related type stuff where you can find network engineering, software development, all that type of work. So those are the next three that are in there. And those are all doing fairly decent, still doing a couple $100 million. And then remediation services as well. Engineering services, that's a loaded term because that's also how the Navy buys IT services. So it's all sorts of stuff wrapped into 541330 here. And then 541990, that's a catch-all depending on what the government's buying. That's why it's kind of hard to see in there. You want to go in and look at, like, you can find this data, by the way, on USA Spending. And so just go into USA Spending, you'll be able to find it. Just search for that period of performance that I said. And then you see some basic stuff, construction at the bottom. So this is from a high level, this is what's being bought. And this is what was awarded direct or sole source to 8A firms last year. So let's talk about who did this. The largest by far, you can see here if you're looking at my screen, is the Department of the Army. The Department of Army last year, the third trimester, if you will, of the year, they spent $1.5 billion on contracts. And this is total contracts, so it includes the recompetes. $1.5 billion. The next closest to, at about $500 million, was the Air Force and Navy. Together, the Air Force and Navy didn't even add up to what the Army spent. This is why I always say, if you're an 8A firm, you need to be getting into the Army for those 9 years. And it might be challenging. Get in there subcontracting early on. Get somebody to help you get your clearances if you need it. But if you do a lot of work that doesn't require clearances, then the Army really seems like a perfect customer for 8A small businesses. And there's got to be a strong rationale for why you're not in there. Same thing with Air Force and Navy. But then as you start coming down, the next biggest spender, if you track this, right, the Army or the Navy and the Air Force are half or less of the spend of the Army. And then the next closest one cuts by half again the amount spent. So it goes from 500 million down to 250 million for Custom and Border Protection over in DHS. And you see this pattern, right? That's DHS. Centers for Disease Control did another 200 million. They're in HHS. Defense Health Agency popping back to DOD. And so from there, it starts going down. I'm showing some of these numbers and you can look at them yourself. But pretty soon you start seeing it drop down well below 150 million and starting to get to, now below 100 million. So we're going from 1.5 billion down here to like the National Park Service or the Coast Guard doing less than 100 million. It's not that they're not a good customer to go into, but when you're thinking your strategy about where we're going, where I like to go is where there's a lot of money, because it increases my chances of being able to have a win. If I'm, all things being equal, if I'm in the Coast Guard, then I'm definitely going to pursue the Coast Guard more. So anyways, you can see coming down farther, like the FBI, they did some sole source, but that was 50 million. Forest Service, 40 million. Those are much lower numbers, and it means there's probably not that many contracts. Literally, you could go in and look at what they did, and I bet it's like 10 or less. And that's just a bet. We'll see. I'm not putting heavy money on it, but I'm pretty confident that, the things they do can add up pretty quickly. Okay, so that's how much is being awarded to 8A firms, what they're buying based on NAICS codes, and then who's winning that stuff. And so let's go on to these 3 tips I want to provide on how you can get in further using your 8A designation. Before I do, though, I just want to share some exciting news. We're really excited. We'll be dropping a new product. We're launching our first big product out there. It's called GovCon in a Box. I'd love to have you join our wait list. We're putting this product out as a way to solve the challenges that I've identified from 6-7 years of training tens of thousands of small businesses, that the three biggest problems that are out there for small businesses hitting that revenue success are getting in the door to meet with federal buyers, finding teammates who want to work with you, and then identifying, pursuing, and responding to opportunities you can win. So if this is something you're interested in hearing about when we launch it, I'd love to have you in our wait list, govconinabox.com. If you're already on the wait list, do me a favor, just throw that into the chat and say govconinabox.com so other people see it as well. You can also just throw in GovCon Rocks. That's always fun. All right, so let me give you 3 tips that I'd like you to walk away with today as you're planning your activity, right? This is not all inclusive. I'm trying to keep it pretty straight. But as you go into the last trimester, and somebody tell me in the chat if that's the right way to say this, but if you go into the last trimester of this fiscal year, 2024, here's what I want you to be doing from June through the end of September. I want you to focus on one department. It could even be one agency. And if you focus large enough, then you should be able to drive into that one department and have the success that you want. So one of the things you do after you determine which agency you're going to go into or department, like I have a customer who wants to go into the Army. We know they want to go into the Army. We're actually going after a pretty decent sized opportunity in a whole different civilian agency. And one of the things we talked about this morning, as we're talking about building up the teaming partners, and we need like an HR kind of a play in there, is maybe we should be looking into the Army and finding companies that are 8A and woman-owned small business in the Army doing HR type services that we might attract into the team and say, hey, we'd like to invite you to this team. And then maybe you could also help us get into the Army and move forward. And so when I say create a visibility plan, what I really mean is how create a plan around how can we become more visible. So one way is what I just suggested. If I have a way to bring them onto my team and get onto their team, I'm starting to find out whether these are good relationships. But the first word here, target, I mean, create a target list of people you can call. So if I want to get into the Army, I'm going to go find winning companies within the Army that I can reach out to and try to talk to. I'm going to find, in particular, contracting officers who have awarded direct award or sole source contracts to 8A in the Army last year. There's a really good chance that they're going to be the same ones who do it this year. One thing is absolutely true is that if I find those people, I don't have to convince them that sole sourcing to an 8A is a good idea. They already know that. They already do it. So now I just need to get in front of them and help them realize that, you know, we're great at what we do and you need our services and all that kind of stuff, right? But creating a target list around that enables you to do outreach. And outreach is literally what it sounds like, right? Pick up the phone and or send an email. Don't spam, but reach out and begin to try to get in the door of teammates who are in the agency you're trying to get into and agency personnel who are in there. Those agency personnel could be the contracting staff, like I mentioned. It could be the small business professionals that are out there. And it could be, for sure, the program offices, right? Beginning to try to understand the needs. You want to have full awareness into that agency. And when you do, and you have a targeted list, you'll be able to have much more success in outreach by getting people to say, come on in, let's talk. And the last thing, one of my favorite ways to get in the door, especially if the door is hard to get into, but even in general, is to respond to sources sought. And you'll hear me talk about this in a minute, but only sources sought that are in your sweet spot. But when you respond to a sources sought notice, the contracting officer, at the very least, who makes decisions about whether they sole source this contract or any other contract to an 8A company, that contracting officer will see your stuff. They might share your stuff with a couple of their colleagues saying, hey, take a look at this response. What do you think? When you respond, and you respond to try to win that contract, not just do the minimal response, when you respond, others in the contract shop will become aware of your company and maybe even invite you in. People in the program office will hear about you and like you enough and say, hey, let's talk to them. I did a training 2 weeks ago, I think, 2 Mondays ago, and you got to go find it. Good luck, because I've done a ton, but go find it, because I walked through step by step how one of my customers just won a a sole source direct award. It was really good for them because we documented the process and said, okay, now let's repeat this over and over in the Army. But they did exactly what I just said, right? They responded to the sources sought. They became visible to the contracting shop and the program office shop, and they were invited in a couple of times to talk, and then that led to a sole source. Doesn't happen every time, but I'm telling you, it becomes much easier if you respond to the government for them to decide to invite you in, have a conversation, perhaps even do a direct award. So that's tip number one, picking one department or one agency. Tip number two, and this is what I alluded to a minute ago, is pursue just one type of past performance. And what I mean by this is you need to figure out what you do and narrow it way down so that you can begin to build past performances. And so if you think about one of the reason I wrote this bullet here, and for those of you who can't see the slides, the first bullet says the best problem you can run into is that a CO or KO will sole source to you. And the reason I call that a best problem, originally I called it a problem, then I was like, well, that's the best problem that can happen, is because this is actually contracting officers awarding you a sole source contract. This is literally a problem, in my opinion, in the 8A program, is that the SBA and the contracting officers, through whatever reasons, and generally it's about generosity, but for whatever reason, they will not keep 8A businesses focused. And so the 8A businesses will often have contracts from many different agencies and many different types of contracts. And so when that 8A firm gets to the 9-year point, they're coming out not any more competitive really than when they went in. Even if they went up to like 10 million, they'll come back down. And it's because they don't have a solid set of relationships within one or two big departments like DHS or Army or something, right? It's because they don't have many past performances around one thing, like elevator services, or I think I put it here, right? Artificial intelligence or administrative support, whatever it is around this one thing. And so the best problem that can happen in the 8A program is you get awarded sole source contracts, but that's actually a hindrance to your success. And so as you go into the third trimester here at the end of the fiscal year, I want you to focus on just one type of past performance you would like to be able to use in future contracts. So when you think about this, if you go in for a contract and you're trying to go after, let's say, a $5 million contract, sometimes it's even much smaller, they're going to sit there and say, hey, do you have 3 past performances? And the best kind of past performances, or if you have federal past performance in, the type of work that goes with the contract that they're trying to let. If you want to grow larger, and if you want to start going after $25 million or $100 million contracts, then you need to have really solid past performances in the exact same space. I've told this story before because it just is such a proud part of what I did in my company, my last company that I owned. But we did SharePoint through and through. And so when we would go after RFPs and RFIs and write our response, and they say, do you have past performances? Because all we did was SharePoint. We didn't do Oracle. We didn't do Google or whatever. We didn't do all these things. We were very biased, vendor biased, meaning we only did Microsoft, and inside of Microsoft, we only did SharePoint. We were able to go after really large contracts, bringing past performances because we had bigger and bigger examples. So for example, not just the total contract value, but we were able to say, hey, we had this many applications we migrated, or we had 100,000 users that we migrated, that kind of thing. And so large growth requires large past performances. And the way you get large past performances is you have a lot of smaller past performances in the same space. This is long-term growth. If you want to grow a $100 million company, you're not going to be able to go after $50 million contracts with past performances that are all over the table, right? You want them to be in your sweet spot. So pick a core competency, certainly for the next trimester, the fiscal year, pick a core competency that is your company's specialty. I put examples down like elevators instead of construction, right? Elevators, we do this better than anybody. That way, when they come out with a contract for some building that has like 50 elevators, you're right in there going, we got past performance after past performance after past performance. The government won't have any concern about the risk of awarding you the contract because you have overwhelmingly demonstrated your experience and other people's paying you for that expertise. And the same thing with AI or cybersecurity, admin support, et cetera. My recommendation as it relates to this is when you pick that core competency, go back to your sales pipeline. Doesn't matter whether it's a spreadsheet or in your head or in a good tool. Not that your head or a spreadsheet are not good tools, but push everything else out of your pipeline. Look at that and go, really, is that going to help me win bigger and bigger contracts? Or is that just something I was interested in? It's in my pipeline. Too many of us have a lot in our pipeline. You really should have like around 40 at the most, right? That's a loose number, but if you have more than 40, there's no way you're paying attention to any of them. And then the last thing is, when you've got your pipeline clean and you have these solid core competencies, or what we like to say, slam dunk opportunities you're going to go after, pursue them aggressively. I've got a customer who's going after this opportunity and they're trying to push out the incumbent, and they're going to go at it pretty aggressively, communicating constantly with that KO and trying to come in from different angles. That's what you can do when you have less opportunities in your pipeline and all of those opportunities are in your sweet spot. All right, the third tip, last tip here, is embrace subcontracting to non-8As. This is a really important thing, right? Bring other small businesses onto your team. I do allude to large businesses later, but really I'm talking about bring other small businesses. I said this earlier that one of my customers is reaching out into the Army and maybe seeing if there's some winning small businesses over there that they can bring out to their civilian customer, and they can work together. Say, hey, I'll help you, you help me, and everybody grows. And then I put here, embrace them and put them on your team, even if you don't need them. This is an investment in your growth and your future. The reality is the profit margin is the profit margin generally. You have costs and you have cost internally and you have cost subcontracting. People overcomplicate that. You just have profit you'll make off it. But the opportunity to grow into other agencies, to grow with that company that you bring onto your team, et cetera, that is so strong for creating a company that will grow into multiple agencies and very strongly. The teaming relationships, the teaming that you do, and when you bring it on, this really builds relationships, right? People are going to appreciate that you reached out and offered something. You didn't ask for something, you offered something. And then as you go along, you can introduce your goals as well. Hey, I'd love to get in over there. And you can do that with smalls to larges. And here I already mentioned this, you can get on their opportunities and get into their target agencies, which is really important. So here's what I want you to remember, and something to take forward. Even next couple of days, really Monday should be an easy day for you. I mean, how much partying are you going to be doing on a federal holiday? But if you took some time, think about this from today's training. Pick one agency, especially if you're an 8A small business, right? Pick one agency that you go, I'm going to commit all in to go in there. HHS or Navy, Air Force, whatever. Pick that one agency and then pick the one core competency or past performance that you would like to have. I would like to have 5 more past performances on building artificial intelligence apps, or using AI around data, like 5 more around how we helped you own your data with AI. And then the third thing is so as you look at that, begin to think about how can you pick other people to bring into your team for opportunities you're going after. Again, like I said, even if you could do all the work yourself, there is massive value if you have a 4-person contract to give 1 to somebody else, or even 2. If you look at the big picture, that will play out very well for you. Anyways, those are my tips for success for you. If you're interested in growing your company within the federal market, you're doing over $2 million, and you'd like our help on it, we have a BD Accelerator workshop that I'd love to talk to you about. Go to govconchamber.com. Just remember, it's got a price tag, so that's why we tend to say 2 million plus for people coming in. For all of us, as we push forward, especially in this last trimester of the year, remember that government contracting, it is not a secret. It's just a process. Part of the process is just coming back to the training, register in the next training, and I will see you in that next training.